Welcome to the second session of Taking the Lead 2020 Policing and Justice. 31 days ago, the brutal and senseless killing of George Floyd sparked a movement in our country that indicated we need to get rid of injustices in all areas. In the aftermath, it opened the door for real critical, courageous, and cultural conversations that lead to produce positive, long-lasting changes. Every community, including Ames, has work to do to ensure that we are moving towards equity, equality, and treatment and outcomes for all. The NAACP advocates the smart, results-based criminal justice policies to keep our communities safe, including treatment for addiction and mental health problems, judicial discretion in sentencing, and an end to racial disparities at all levels of the system. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the City of Ames for partnering with the Ames NAACP branch to make this important series available. We are pleased that the city has adopted goals essential to ensuring equitable policing and justice. Those of valuing a diverse, equitable, and inclusive community, and of valuing communications and encouragement with the public. As you listen tonight, I encourage you to pause. Remember, nothing changes when we don't learn, we don't grow, and we don't share with integrity, humility, and the desire for social justice. I also invite you to join us on the third session of the series on July 9th, 2020, the same place and the same time, different folks. Now, we will hear from Mayor Haila.
Thank you, Edna. On behalf of the City of Ames, it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's second of 4 community discussions. I acknowledge and thank President Edna Clinton for her leadership, for Dr. Stewart for serving as moderator, for those who are panelists this evening, and for the NAACP for hosting tonight's session. The City of Ames is indeed honored to co-sponsor tonight's event. The Ames City Council and I, as mayor, continue to grieve over the killing of Black men and women around the nation and the discrimination and injustice experienced by the Black community. As mentioned by President Clinton, in my opening remarks 2 weeks ago, last January, the City Council did adopt biennial goals to address issues related to diversity and inclusivity in our community. In order to accomplish that objective, open, frank, and informed conversation has to happen in our community in order to understand the issues that exist in Ames. We as Ames residents must be actively engaged in discussions like the one tonight. I'm really encouraged because some have already begun since 2 weeks ago. Our community is not perfect, as President Clinton indicated. Change starts with each one of us. We first have to identify what changes each of us have to make. Then we need to work together as a community to improve our community so that every person is welcomed and treated equally in Ames. It's now my honor to turn over the rest of the evening to Dr. Stewart as moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Haila. Good evening. I'm Reg Chen Stewart, Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion at Iowa State University, and I'm honored to moderate the second of 4 panels. For those who joined us 2 weeks ago, welcome back. And for those of you who this is your first panel, Thank you for being an active contributor to the change that we're trying to see in our community. Do note that we encourage people to locate the Ames branch of NAACP online if you have questions that you want to submit. All of the questions that I read are users submitted. But before I get into the questions, I do want to make some important point. I received an email earlier from the Students Against Racism at Iowa State University. And although we were talking about a different panel, they made a very good point. And the point that I wanted to share with the panelists tonight is that Zoom, right? This is not the optimal format for this type of conversation, as you well know. And I think the largest part being that my ability to convey the emotion behind the question is lost because I have to read it very clearly so that you can understand the tone, the tonality, and the questioning. So what I'm asking you to do is, as you respond to the questions, please also respond to Mayor Haila. If you could mute your camera, we can see you moving around there. If you can understand the passion, the hurt, the frustration behind the question, I think it'll make for a more meaningful dialogue, so that it's one where these questions are coming from a place of frustration, hurt, in many instances, anger. And that's how I want you to interpret them, even if my tone doesn't convey that. So if you'll do that, I think it will be a really beneficial conversation. Our panelists tonight include Deputy Chief Carrie Jacobs, Iowa State University Police, Sheriff Paul Fitzgerald, Story County Sheriff's Office, Commander Geoff Huff, City of Ames Police Department Patrol Division. So our first panel covered aspects of overall police administration in the community. There were a lot of structural questions. Tonight, we will move more to questions that expressly address the national conversation. These questions indicate that our community wants to know how our local agencies address these larger issues. So with that, I'll ask each panelist to give a short 2-minute introduction of who they are and why you chose law enforcement as a profession. And then we'll begin the questions. And Carrie, we will begin with you.
Good evening, everyone. As stated, my name is Carrie Jacobs, and I am the Deputy Chief with Iowa State University Police. I'm originally from Iowa, and I've spent the majority of my life living here in Iowa. I received my undergraduate degree right here at Iowa State University, and later on I pursued my master's degree at Concordia University. I have been in law enforcement for 23 years, and I began my law enforcement career at the Iowa Falls Police Department, which is a small agency located in north central Iowa. After serving that agency for about 5 years, I decided to pursue an opportunity here at Iowa State University because this was my first home away from home, and I've been serving with ISU Police for the last 17 years. Growing up, I learned early on that it was really important to serve and take care of others, particularly when they were in crisis. And I chose a career in policing because I believe it was and still is the best way for me to make a positive impact on individuals. I am currently a deputy chief here at ISU Police. My duties involve overseeing field services, which compromises the patrol unit as well as dispatch operations. But in addition, I get the honor of managing our engagement and inclusion officer program, which is a team of officers as well as civilian staff members who represent our effort to be an active partner in bringing about positive change as well as fostering an inclusive climate here at Iowa State University.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Paul, would you please introduce yourself to us? You're still on mute, Paul.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Stewart. I'd like to begin, first of all, by thanking the Ames branch of the Ames, Iowa branch of the NAACP and the City of Ames for putting together this forum tonight. I also want to thank you for not forgetting about and including the Story County Sheriff. In Story County, all agencies work in partnership, and we're at Ames and Iowa State as we assist each other throughout the year in whatever the situation may bring. I'm from Colo, Iowa, in the eastern part of Story County. Fitzgerald's, my family settled in Story County in 1852. So I guess you could say I'm a long-term resident of Story County. I'm the youngest of 6 children, been from I guess I would say a privileged family from the standpoint that as a baby of the family, all 6 of us have received our undergraduate degrees at least. I was fortunate enough to go on and earn my master's degree, and I actually finished my master's degree in my first term as Story County Sheriff. When I was in high school, there was nothing else I wanted to do more than be in law enforcement. That's all I ever dreamed about. That's all I ever wanted to do. So when I graduated from high school, I attended Hawkeye Institute of Technology, now known as Hawkeye Community College, earned a 2-year AA degree in police science. I then went to Wartburg College in Waverly, Iowa, and I received my bachelor's degree in law enforcement. And then my senior year at Wartburg, I was hired by the Waterloo Police Department, and I worked there for the next 15 years. At the Waterloo Police Department, I worked most all possible shifts and positions. I was in patrol. I was a detective. I was on the SWAT team. I was on field training officer. I was a PIO. And the last couple of years, I've been promoted to sergeant. And I worked directly for the chief of the police in community policing. I always knew that a dream I had was to be sheriff. So about the 13th year into Waterloo, I knew I wanted to come back and run for sheriff. So I started setting myself up for that. And that's when I went back to work on my master's degree at St. Ambrose University in Davenport, Iowa.
Paul, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll circle back and I'll ask you some more deeper questions about yourself. Thank you. Geoff?
Good evening. Thanks for having us again. My name is Geoff Huff. I'm actually from Cedar Falls, Iowa, not too far away from here, about an hour and a half down the road. Grew up in Cedar Falls, went to Cedar Falls High School, attended the University of Northern Iowa, where I did my undergrad in criminology. I actually started off at UNI as a business student, and my entire family's in the construction business, so I always had a job in the summer, whether I wanted one or not. But when I went to UNI, I actually got a job at public safety at UNI on a student patrol program where we locked buildings, unlocked buildings, did some safety checks and those kind of things. And when I got into that, I pretty quickly realized that it was something I actually had a passion for, and switched my major from business to criminology and started really looking at a career in law enforcement. After I graduated, I applied right here in Ames, interviewed, hired, started in August of 1994. So I'm just coming up almost on 26 years, not too long from now. I've worked a number of different assignments within the police department. I've always been honored to work here, and I have a family here, like many other people on the panel. I've got a couple of daughters. They both went to Ames High School. I had one just graduate from Iowa State last year, and one starting college this fall. So I have a big stake in what happens here in Ames because I also have a family. So at my time here, I was promoted to corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, and commander throughout my career. I attended the 230th session of the FBI National Academy in 2007, which started me down the road of working on my master's degree. So the FBI National Academy is basically executive leadership training. And that got me started, completed my master's degree in 2010. And as you know, I currently manage the patrol division for the city of Ames, which includes 3 shifts, our safe neighborhoods team, our community resource officer. It's about 45 officers or so, including the parking division and our community safety officers. And my responsibility, obviously, is to manage the division. And I'd just like to add that we value problem solving and relationship building. And I hope that's what everyone expects from us. And that's, I hope, what we do. And I take that responsibility very seriously.
Thank you very much, Geoff. So we're going to build on the problem solving aspect first. So again, Deputy Chief Jacobs, Sheriff Fitzgerald, and Commander Huff, thank you very much for taking the time to have this conversation with us tonight. So before we begin this week's questions, we had a question last week that was posed to the chiefs that I wanted to give you an opportunity to build out a little bit. And this was in relationship to how your department addresses people who call police for things like bird watching and barbecuing in parks, etc. The response that both of our chiefs said was the focus was on giving education and being less punitive in terms of sort of corrective measures. And the questions that came into me over the past 2 weeks were, well, if we give speeding tickets to discourage speeding, and we give parking tickets to discourage people from improperly leaving their vehicle places, why don't we take a more aggressive approach to people who make these types of phone calls, et cetera? So I'll give each of you an opportunity to the best of your ability. I know you didn't have this conversation, but this gives an opportunity for you to problem solve in real time. And Sheriff Fitzgerald, how about we start with you?
Certainly. Iowa code allows officers discretionary authority. Therefore, if we have a car that's illegally parked, we can give it a ticket. We may choose not to give it a ticket. We stop speeders, we give a verbal warning, write them a ticket. It's the discretion of the officer at that time. When we have community gatherings, whether it's in a park or wherever, we take each incident as an individual incident, and we don't have a standard format of handling each and every call. There's reasons that each call might be different, each concern, each complaint, and the officers that we hire at the Sheriff's Office in Story County, we hire them, we train them, and I believe that we turn out a quality professional individual. So we have faith in our officers as they go out and interact with the community and talk with people regardless of the situation or the event. Our people, we make sure that we have the funding so we can properly equip, properly train, and support our officers that are out in the field doing the job day to day.
Thank you, Paul. Deputy Chief Jacobs, would you like to take that?
Absolutely. One of the ways in which our agency attempts to kind of suss out those different types of calls for service is starting right at where we get the calls coming in, and that is with our dispatch center. We have been training our dispatchers very much like our officers to start to ask more questions as it relates to some of these types of calls. For example, when we get a call in as it relates to a suspicious person, we like to ask them a few more questions such as behavior. What is it about this individual, or what is it about their actions that is suspicious? Because what we've been finding in the past and with a lot of these calls that have been experienced by others across the country, and that is people are talking about personal characteristics or that which identifies the person instead of talking about the actual behavior or what they find to be suspicious. When we get the opportunity, we do like to follow up with the caller, particularly when we receive an example that is clearly not anything related to a crime. We recently had a situation where a dispatch took a caller. Unfortunately, it happened to be an anonymous caller who did not leave us much information and then hung up with no callback number. When the dispatch gave the officer the information, which turned out to simply be an individual walking on Central Campus with green hair talking on a cell phone, the officer asked the dispatcher, "Is that all the information you have for me?" The dispatcher said yes, and the officer says, "Thank you, I will disregard," because there was nothing within that group of information that told us anything that was suspicious or criminal in nature. But again, when we have the opportunity, we will call back, provide that education, and then determine, okay, do we have an ongoing false report issue going on? And if not, then we try to proceed with the education piece.
Thank you, Carrie. Commander Huff?
A little slow on the unmute, sorry. I don't want to repeat too much what Carrie just said because that's kind of what we do too. We've had those discussions at our communications center about when we're taking these calls for service, we do need to vet them a little bit and find out, is this actually a law enforcement call for service? Does this belong in another arena? And part of what we have to do is recalibrate the public to kind of a different expectation that we're going to ask more questions when we're called to make sure that we're being called for legitimate reasons and not for illegitimate ones. And that's going to take some time because as we've been talking for years, see something, say something. And so we get a lot of pushback from the public when they call in what they believe to be suspicious activity, and we're questioning them heavily about that. We get some pushback about, well, why don't you just go check it out? And we have to let them know it's because we investigate criminal activity. And so we ask those tough questions. And the other thing that we do have is we always have a supervisor on duty, either a sergeant or lieutenant, and they're constantly monitoring the radio traffic. And so when they hear those calls for service, if they do go out, they may put a hold on that. And in some cases, they'll call the caller back and they may ask more questions if the dispatcher didn't. Or they may just say, we're not going to go to that call because there is no law enforcement action needed there. So this is going to be a learning process for police officers, and it's going to be a learning process for the public that you might not get an instant response by law enforcement just because you called in something that you think is suspicious.
Geoff, thank you. I'm going to stay with you. We had a community member that submitted a question that I think builds directly off of this. And really, it's part of the distinction between sort of an officer-initiated stop and a call-in or a report from a community member. And so I'm going to read the question directly. One community member noted that some of the unnecessary violence that has come from officers responding to non-violence or financial crimes, for example, George Floyd, Eric Garner, just to name a few. Do you think that some of these complaints would have been better handled or best handled over the phone, or if there was an online reporting mechanism so that the automatic reaction is not to call the police and then initiate that activity? Geoff, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. One thing that has come out of the new world we live in with COVID-19 is that we have looked for all kinds of different ways to do business that limits face-to-face interaction. And so we're starting to work more and more in that arena now. So that is one of the things that we're looking at is what can we do to improve upon our online reporting. I think most people are pretty good at it now and they expect some level of online reporting, but our system right now just really isn't robust for that. So we do have the ability to do a little bit, but not much. But part of it is when people call for a crime, they do expect an officer to have a face-to-face interaction. So while we may utilize phone calls, text messages, and other means to get more information, it's no replacement for having an officer on scene where they can interview witnesses and in some cases collect statements or collect evidence. You only really get one chance to collect evidence, and once that's over, you're done and you can't go back and recreate that. So I think that maybe is one of the difficulties of too much online reporting is it doesn't really lend itself to very thorough investigations if we don't have an officer right there on scene. But having said that, there's certainly things that we can take over the phone, online, to limit some of those interactions.
Thank you. Carrie, do you want to add any? Can you build on that at all for us?
Absolutely. I can just mention a couple things. Right now, we do have one online mechanism that we utilize for minor thefts, such as stolen bicycles. Just to kind of play off a little bit more on what Geoff had mentioned as it related to the COVID-19 guidelines, we are also taking over the phone non-emergent calls for service, and some of those do include the fraud and financial crimes, as well as theft, lost property, and even minor vehicle crashes that do not involve any personal injury. So yes, it is possible to continue that aspect, but I think Geoff brings up a very good point in that there are some incidents where community members absolutely need that officer response. However, I believe utilizing telephone service as well as online is a good way to kind of get some of those basic calls for service taken care of.
Thank you. So Paul, I'm going to give you a little bit of a curveball. Instead of answering that question directly, I'm going to build on it for you to keep going so we get to some more of these questions. So that there is a call, an officer goes out to initiate an interaction. The second question was, what tools and resources, for example, does the Sheriff's Department have that are available beyond arrest or moving somebody into the criminal justice system? So what tools or resources do you have beyond that arrest?
Well, I guess I would first of all start to address that by saying this is not only what we do within the Story County Sheriff's Office. We have a very strong working relationship with the other law enforcement agencies in Story County. here in Nevada, City of Ames, Iowa State, Story City, Huxley. We all work together. We've all worked on mental health issues and task forces, and the things that we've come up with that help us divert these problems is we have the mobile crisis response team that we can call for mental illness. We work closely, and I've been on the board of directors for NAMI, the National Alliance on the Mentally Ill. We have Mary Greeley Hospital that we partner with. We have a long-standing relationship with the Center for Creative Justice. I myself was a board member there for 12 years. We work in these areas, but one of the things that I didn't get squeezed in my opening was that the sheriff's office and the police departments are a little different. The sheriff is an arm of the court. Therefore, we do all civil process, and we also do the jail. Now, if an individual is arrested and is brought into the jail, we have various programs there for diversion. We have life skills programs like balancing a checkbook, how to budget their money. We have Alcoholic Anonymous classes. We have Narcotic Anonymous classes. We have religious services, mental health screening, and we also utilize the services of community and family resources.
Thank you very much for that education and to build upon that. This next question is long, so I want you to pay attention to it. It's a macro question, so it's a question at the 35,000 foot level that we would like for all of you to answer. And we'll start, Carrie, we're going to start with you on this one. Question number 3 says, the ACLU has found that Iowa has the 5th highest racial disparity in the country of arrests for Black people for marijuana offenses per 1,000 in the population. The data available to the ACLU show that the racial disparity in Story County is quite high. A Black person is 8 times more likely than a white person to be arrested for marijuana possession. So what are your agencies doing to address and reverse these disparities in arrest rates? And Carrie, we'll start with you.
Well, I think it actually goes back to simply how we're responding to these calls to begin with. Whether it's marijuana call, suspicious person, or any other type of call for service, first and foremost, we're there to respond to whatever is going on. And regardless of the individual that we were encountering, it is important for us to follow our stated guidelines. And that is, first and foremost, we're going to be courteous, we're going to be professional, we're going to immediately identify ourselves as well as the agency we're representing. We're going to tell that individual exactly why we're engaging in a conversation with them or why we stopped them, letting them know the details as well as the reasoning behind that. And then not detaining them for very long, and of course being able to answer any and all questions they may have for us. And then of course providing our name and our contact information when asked for it. And just being able to understand that going into this situation, if I'm going to, like Sheriff Fitzgerald talked earlier about discretion, if the intent going into the situation before you even get there is, okay, how do I want to take care of this? How do the officers want to take care of this? Is this going to be an educational moment, or is this going to be where we need to go ahead and issue a citation, or will an arrest be involved? Now, granted, a lot of that is going to depend on the context of the call as well as what's going on at that time. However, keeping in mind that it's going to be the behavior and the violation of law and not determined by who the person is, their background, or what else may be going on at that time, because it's important with all calls, particularly these types of calls where there is a disparity, that we need to ensure that we are following those guidelines and we are being consistent and we are treating people fairly. And one of the best ways to do that is going to be to do it the same way each and every time to the best of our ability, as long as the circumstances of the incident allow it.
Thank you. So Sheriff Fitzgerald had mentioned during the stops that, there's officer discretion. And I think the question here, or at least the impetus behind the question is, if I'm 8 times as likely as someone else for an offense like marijuana possession, is that a manifestation of training, education, because we give this discretion to the officers? I think what ultimately as a community we're trying to get to is it's a significant number. And so as such, we're trying to get you were the 30 year, 20-year law enforcement professionals. You all look at this much deeper than we do. So then the question begs the question, and Sheriff Fitzgerald, I'll ask you to kind of to build out on where I'm trying to go with this, which is if we see these numbers being this sort of extrapolation, we're really just trying to get to the why. And of course it's a difficult question to answer, but to the best of your ability, what would we attribute such a disparity to?
That's for me, I assume.
Yes, sir.
Okay. First of all, let me start out, as I understand the question, is what can be done to reverse the disparity? And the way I look at this is, first of all, it begins by getting involved with your association, both at the state and the federal level. In Iowa, I'm a member of the Iowa State Sheriffs and Deputies Association, the Iowa Police Chiefs Association. Federally, I'm a member of the National Sheriff's Association, of which I'm a past president of, and also the International Association of Chiefs of Police and other organizations. And the reason I bring this up is that we're going to change things and change laws. We have to be active with our lobbyists and legislators. And these associations have lobbyists that go on the Hill on both Iowa and the United States Capitol. I've given testimony myself in hearings at the United States Capitol. Now, one of the other things is the past president of the National Sheriff's Association. A few years ago, I was contacted by the Brennan Center, the think tank out of the New York University School of Law, and asked if I would be one of the founding members of a group called Law Enforcement Leaders to Reduce Crime and Incarceration. And the original group, about 130 of us, and now it's over 200. But there was sheriffs, police chiefs, prosecuting attorneys, all 50 states attorney generals are involved, and then other academia from the different schools. So anyway, we've been working on this, and they give reports to the President's Commission on Crime as they're looking at how they're going to redesign and give suggestions on modern American policing and how that advances. Senator Grassley had written legislation, and I wrote an op-ed that was published in the Des Moines Register a couple of years ago supporting his writing on that. And that's how I think we truly get up a group to bring about change. Officers will certainly do it on the street with our discretion, but to bring about laws nationwide that are effective and meaningful, you need to have people that have the understanding that do work in these areas and can have their voices heard and amplified where it is necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Commander Huff.
Thanks. I think there's really a deeper question in this question. To be honest, we need to look, anytime there's a disproportionality, we need to try and understand why there's a disproportionality. So that means a deep and honest look into our practices. We need to understand why that disproportionality is occurring. Is it bias on the part of police? Is it a bias on the part of a caller? Are there other factors at work? But what are bringing those two people together that results in charging that's 8 times higher? We need to understand what that is, and we just have to be willing to be honest enough to look at our data, take a deep dive, and try and understand it. We take a lot of calls here in the city of Ames for the smell of marijuana, especially in all the apartment buildings that we have. I'm sure the university is the same way. We get a lot of these calls, and we try and go out there. But one of the things that we also have been doing, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is we're trying to get out of the business of solving every single problem that happens. And so in some of these cases, it might be a better job for the apartment managers and owners to step up a little bit and kind of handle the problems that are occurring in their buildings too, not just making everything a law enforcement officer showing up. As they legalize and decriminalize marijuana in the states around us, we're going to just see more of it. And so I think, honestly speaking, we need to take a deep look and try and understand why.
Thank you, Commander. Deputy Chief Jacobs, this is another macro question. This is our community. And the question is actually focused in Des Moines. So we'll have you kind of stretch your boundaries just a little bit south for us. The Des Moines City Council on Monday passed a measure to ban racial profiling by the police force. Do your agencies have policies in place already that ban racial profiling?
Absolutely, we do. It's called the bias-free policing policy, and it is located underneath our limits of authority policy or directive. ISU Police has not tolerated discrimination, and we will not tolerate discrimination against any person. And bias-based profiling, without a doubt, constitutes discrimination. We require training on bias-free policing once a year. Our employees are strictly prohibited from engaging in any type of behavior related to bias-based profiling. And if officers are found to be engaging in this type of behavior, they can be disciplined up to and including termination. And as I mentioned earlier about treating everyone with a consistent basis, that is also outlined very thoroughly in that policy, because it's important that officers understand and realize that we hold a lot of responsibility. There is very few, if any, other professions out there that allow a person to take away temporarily the civil rights of another person. That is an awesome responsibility, and it's not one to be taken lightly. And it's important for all officers to recognize that. And one of the best ways for us to do that is to be able to respond not only in a professional and courteous manner, but also to recognize that there are these issues out there and that people we may be engaging with are going to have a very strong, fearful reaction to us because they have been victims of profiling, even though they haven't done anything wrong. And we need to recognize that, because only then when we acknowledge and recognize it can we actually start to take that step in building trust with our community.
Thank you. Sheriff Fitzgerald, can you speak about the Sheriff's Department racial profiling, your policy related to that?
Yes, sir. First of all, no, we do not have a policy directly banning racial profiling. However, in 2012, we adopted a value-based code of conduct, which every officer is given, has to read, and held accountable to it as a policy and procedure. This is a book that we have that's given to every officer. Along with that, we do additional trainings annually throughout the year: harassment and diversity, appropriate workplace behavior, de-escalation, mental health response, mental health first aid, stress management, compassion fatigue, decision-making, in 21st century policing. We did a study over a 5-year period, and what we had done is we looked at each year our calls for service that deputies are dispatched to. We have about 15,000 calls for service each year, and we also looked at the complaints that we tracked and that were reported. And for each year of the 15,000 calls for service each year, we averaged 8.8 complaints each year. I think that's a very strong demonstration of the values and the self-imposed morals that my employees also bring to this agency.
Thank you. Commander Huff, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, we also have a policy on bias-based policing. It's Chapter 401, and all of our policies are on the City of Ames website on the police page. So if you go to the police page from the City of Ames page, kind of in the middle, down below some phone numbers, there's a direct link, and you can pull up every single one of our policies and look at it. But deeper than just having the policy is we need to be held accountable too. And part of that bias-based policing policy is officers contacting a person shall be prepared to articulate sufficient reason for the contact. And so we expect to be held to that. And I would say to anybody out there, if you feel like you have been stopped for a reason that is not appropriate, we need to hear from you, and we need to hear from you right away. We have a supervisor on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and they will take a report. They will look into it. We have body-worn cameras. We have video cameras in our cars, and so we do have the ability to look back and determine whether that stop or that encounter was appropriate. And so we want you to hold us accountable. And I would just urge everyone out there that if you feel like that wasn't the case, you weren't handled with respect, that we want to know about it so we can look into it so we can take action. Oh, you're muted, Reg. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Geoff. So what I want to circle back to is just what you said related to the experience of the officers and training and accountability. So what I'm going to ask you to do is help our viewers by explaining what this term that I'm going to use means, and then answer the question. And so do you think that there would be unintended consequences if something like qualified immunity were to go away? So I would like for you to just give a brief explanation of what qualified immunity, and so to build the questions said, such as good police officers leaving the job, or more stress for police officers on the job. So do you think there would be unintended consequences from this conversation nationally on getting rid of qualified immunity?
Sorry, that one's for me, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there has been a lot of talk lately on qualified immunity, and I've heard it described a lot of different ways. I'm not sure. It is a difficult concept to sort of understand, but it does kind of concern me. So one of the things that I would say is that qualified immunity is just not immunity for police officers, that they can't be held accountable, they can't be sued. That's not what it is. Qualified immunity is given by a judge who looks at the facts of a case, and the way they look at the case is in the most favorable light to the plaintiff. And after doing that, they make a determination whether a clearly established rule or law has been violated. So again, it is kind of hard to understand, but it's not an absolute immunity for anybody, and it's not given in every case. In cases where the judge feels like it maybe is unclear, because sometimes it is based on the information they have, then they'll let that go to trial and let a jury decide what the outcome is. So obviously our fear would be if something like qualified immunity went away, then just about any lawsuit could go forward. And one thing it'll do is it's really going to clog up the system if judges aren't given some authority to do away with, I guess, spurious lawsuits, of which there are some. There's obviously other ones that do need to move forward, and those are the ones that actually have merit. And so that determination by the judge on when they have merit and when they don't, is really based closely on the facts of the case. And again, in the most favorable light to the plaintiff or the person that brings that lawsuit forward. If that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Sheriff Fitzgerald, would you like to speak at all on the qualified immunity question?
Yes, thank you. Agreeing with what Commander Huff just said. Again, the understanding of looking at someone with qualified immunity, what the court looks at is if the constitutional rights of that individual was violated. If they were not violated, they're granted qualified immunity. If they were, then they're not granted qualified immunity. And that opens them up to a host of things. You have civil violations, you have criminal violations, you have disciplinary within your own agency. And the aspect that you might look that qualified immunity protects both officers and the society from a standpoint that when officers come into a situation, quite often they have to make split-second decisions on what to do. And their actions are also reviewed later on, and takes as much time as they want to review what the officer should have done. But we also want to protect the officer from a standpoint that when they go out to do their jobs to better serve the public that we're working with, that they can do that without fear of losing their job regardless of what they do. In this country, everyone deserves and gets due process. That's not only for the folks that are arrested, that's also for everyone, law enforcement included. So when a matter does happen, then that's when the item has to be investigated. In our office, we've had times where the information brought to me, I called in the Division of Criminal Investigation to give a clear and transparent view of what happened. They investigated the situation, conferred with our county attorney, and then made a recommendation to me. Several of the recommendations hasn't been criminal, but those individuals are no longer with this agency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. Deputy Chief Jacobs, I'm going to let you speak to qualified immunity, and then I'm going to give you the next question right after that.
All right, I just wanted to kind of continue on the other part of your question when you talked about would this keep good officers from walking off the job if they weren't allowed to have qualified immunity. And I think that regardless of whether or not qualified immunity exists, number one, yes, it is there to protect both sides, but number two, individuals who go into this profession for the right reasons are going to continue to stay with the profession regardless of what's going on out there, and we want to be held accountable for our actions. I haven't met any agency, at least here in Surrey County, that would consider walking off the job because qualified immunity went away. We came into this profession to make a difference. Not only do we want to make a difference, but we want to be that difference. So whatever is going on, particularly when it happens to be something that we have a big part of and something that we can help improve, I only see officers continuing to keep doing the job, to keep doing the right things. Yes, it's going to be stressful, but we have community members who have been living under stress their entire lives. So whenever I think that this job gets too stressful, that's what I think about. Those community members who are out there going through similar stress and thinking to myself, okay, what can I do to ease their stress as well as help serve the community and help serve those specific community members and to improve our responses, whether or not qualified immunity is there.
Thank you, Carrie. So this stress, this frustration that we've been experiencing as a country has raised the question about diverting money from police departments, right? And effectively the conversation is, so what are your thoughts on diverting money from policing to other community services? And that's I think the important distinction. Taking money that we earmark for police departments and going to EMT, mental health services, child services, job services, housing, etc. What are your thoughts on diverting money from policing to other community services?
Without a doubt, ISU Police supports making sure that those other services are funded so they can go out there and respond to the needs of the community. One thing that ISU Police has done within our own agency is diversify some of those services within, and we continue to do so. For example, in March of 2019, we hired a full-time mental health advocate whose responsibility is to assist with response and follow-up to mental health calls for service. In addition, we've had the sexual assault response team, which both Story County as well as Ames Police Department are longstanding members of. This is a multidisciplinary team that has a very victim-centered approach that also not only includes law enforcement, but also medical and advocacy. So that way the victim is able to get assistance without necessarily having law enforcement intervention. In addition, other mental health services, Sheriff Fitzgerald mentioned the mobile crisis response team, who is available to assist when law enforcement may not be an appropriate response to that call. I don't believe we are going to be able to completely or 100% back away from some of these calls for service, mainly due to the fact that law enforcement is one of the few 24/7 operations that is available. And there are times, particularly when people are in crisis, where they just don't have time to wait, even if it may be just 15 or 20 minutes. But we all understand and know when somebody's in crisis, every minute counts. So I think we still need to be available for those types of calls and services. However, I think it's important that not only law enforcement diversify within their own agency, but also to expand that a little bit to include and to partner with other services that are out there.
Thank you very much. Commander Huff, I'm going to stay in this question line, but I'm going to give you another component of it because we want to make sure to cover as much ground as we can. So this is related to, this is the same body of questions as diverting money from policing to other services. And this is the part B of the question, which speaks to not only the diverting money, but the abolition of policing as it exists in the United States. So here's the question. The historical legacy of policing, which originated as slave patrols and now contributes to the mass incarceration of Black people as well as their murders, must be abolished. will you support the abolition of policing as it has existed in the United States?
So I think obviously policing is going to change. We do need to disaggregate police from some of the activities that we're doing because we're just the wrong social actor here. It's going to take a lot of recalibrating the expectations of the public that we serve, though. Again, just like Carrie said, we're one of the last 24/7, 365 operations. And so people are very used to calling 911 or calling one of our non-emergency lines when they want whatever service that may be. And we're kind of the last one-stop shop. So a part of this is moving with the public to decide, and it's almost like a contract with the public we serve on what things is it appropriate for law enforcement to continue to do and what things are appropriate for another social actor. I don't think it's so much about defunding the police as it is about funding these other social services so that they can be better partners with law enforcement and better partners with the community because we need the assistance in problem solving. And I did read through the slides that were provided on what a world looks like without police. And when I read most of the slides, I thought that's exactly what we're doing right now. A first responder trained in mental health comes to your door. That's the police department right now. Folks sleeping in a park and an employee comes up and asks them if they need a place to stay. Right now, that is the police department. That is what we do. And whether or not we should continue to do that is an important question. And is there another social actor that can do that? And one thing I just want to bring up, and I'll be quick about it, is there's an exciting new thing that's coming, a drug diversion program that we recently got federal funding for. We're going to be piloting that program right here in Story County. I think Ames Police Department is probably going to start. I know the other agencies will also be involved. But instead of arresting people who have drug and alcohol problems, we're going to divert them directly from the criminal justice system, hopefully before jail, and get them into treatment where they get help instead of jail. And so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail because I know you want to get to other questions, but I think it's important to point out that we're already looking for new and better ways to do this business and start moving some of these services to the proper social actor. And we're going to back out slowly out of some of these, but we will need the public's help in determining what our place should be.
Excellent. We're going to circle back to a question about community policing, but I wanted to give Sheriff Fitzgerald an opportunity to speak to his thoughts on the national conversation on diverting funds to other agencies and or the abolition of the policing as it currently exists in the United States.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say no, I do not support the defunding of police. We certainly support these programs that are out there, and we got to find ways, which we have collectively in Story County been working on, to improve and create new services to be delivered to people throughout Story County. With everything that's going on, we've seen in the past where laws have been created from a knee-jerk reaction, and then it's taken years to go back to rectify and change those laws so they appropriately fit. Right now, this is a societal experiment on what modern American policing should be. And as we look at this, I do think it needs study. The White House has, the president has called for a crime commission who is working out of the White House now. There is the Brennan Center that I've talked with you about, and legislation. But just to come up and create a new law or to just dismantle the police department, our number one priority to the citizens at any level of government is to provide for the public safety. And until we can change to what maybe a futuristic law enforcement agency may look like, I think right now we have the best that we have, and we continue to keep working with this and trying to continue to professionalize ourselves, professionalize law enforcement, and to create greater strengths through bonding with other social services that also provide desperately needed services throughout the communities.
Thank you very much, Paul. Paul, I'm going to stay with you as we close out. If you can each take a minute and a half at the most to tell us, what does community policing mean to you? And Sheriff Fitzgerald, we'll start with you.
Well, first of all, community policing, I think, has originally began with the sheriff. The sheriff is different from other law enforcement cities. You have, whether it's federal, state, or local, the chiefs, the director of the FBI, the commissioner of public safety, they're all appointed. The sheriff is the only elected leader in law enforcement that the public can decide who they want their leader to be. And we work on how we're best going to serve and we have the Story County Sheriff's Office. Our mission statement says the mission of the Story County Sheriff's Office is to ensure public safety through the implementation of professional and proactive law enforcement services, and to build public trust by maintaining the highest standards of performance, integrity, and ethics. And with that, I would like to close with, again, thanking the Ames, Iowa branch of the NAACP and the city of Ames for putting this forum together. And again, thank you for including Story County Sheriff's Office with this.
Thank you very much, Paul. Commander Huff, what does community policing mean to you?
So I think it really, at its core, it's fostering partnerships, relationships, and collaboration with the public we serve. We can't do this alone. We don't solve crimes alone. We don't fix problems alone. Nobody can problem solve by themselves. So I think to remember, every time you see a police officer driving around in Ames, remember that they're a part of that community too. We have no stake in not fostering those relationships. Like I said in my opening, my kids went to school here. They went to Ames High, Iowa State. And so I'm just like every other citizen in Ames. I want a safe place to live, and I want a safe and welcoming community for everybody else, because I want this community to grow and be the best that it can. Any us versus them mentality is just really counterproductive. So our goal is to make sure that we're engaging with every member of the community and not marginalizing anyone. And I'll tell you right now, we know that we're not reaching every citizen. And so we need the help. We need help from the NAACP. We need help from Black Lives Matter. We need help from a lot of organizations, and some we don't even know about, to make sure that we are collaborating with every community member. It's why we participate in the programs that we do. You know, we were asked, why were we at some of these protests that have occurred? It's because we're a part of the community. And I think there's an expectation that will be there. And whether that's answering tough questions or sharing some pizza with some folks in the park, that's a part of the job too. And we care deeply for the community and every member. And it's why we hire the people that we hire. And it's why we promote the people that we promote. And it's why we serve. So I'd also like to thank the NAACP for putting this together. It's important to have these discussions. I hope they continue. I hope we can continue face to face at some point. But really, thank you for including us. I'm honored.
Geoff, thank you. Deputy Chief Jacobs, what does community policing mean to you?
Community policing to me means being willing to get out of your comfort zone and make those unexpected relationships. We recognize the fact that a lot of our community members who see us on a daily basis don't look at us with admiration or a sense of safety, but rather fear and trepidation. And the only way that we're ever going to breach that barrier is by being willing to sit down at the table and have some of those difficult conversations. One of the most important catalysts that have come about from our EIO program is getting our officers out there within some of these communities and sitting down across the table and having those difficult conversations, talking about what fears they have and ways that we can not only improve our service, but also taking a really hard look at ourselves and thinking about how can we improve our response, how can we learn, how can we unlearn things, unlearn our own internal biases, and start fresh, start taking that first step forward, because we recognize the fact that we can't do this on our own. We need to partner with each other and to come together and to be able to make long-lasting improvements and change. And we can't do that by ourselves. We can't do that alone. So getting out and making those unexpected relationships.
Thank you. Thank you. Deputy Chief Carrie Jacobs, Iowa State University Police, Sheriff Paul Fitzgerald, Story County Sheriff's Office, Commander Geoff Huff, City of Ames Police Department Patrol Division, thank you for taking this hour with with us on behalf of the Ames branch of the NAACP and Iowa State University Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We appreciate your time. We look forward to conversation number 3 in 2 weeks, and that will be moderated by Jasmine Brooks and Jordan Brooks. Thank you and have a good evening.